Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Brian's Book Bash, and we are officially on episode 25, which for some reason that feels like a huge milestone. Ah, yes, a quarter of 100, a number we just made up somewhere in time. This week was apparently a book buying week.
Are you about to book haul?
I'm not book hauling.
Oh my god, book haul!
This is just a few books I picked up this week.
Book haul, hashtag book haul.
Hashtag micro book haul. Maybe.
Hashtag Barnes Noble, hashtag Amazon, hashtag book haul. Brian's Book Bashing book haul.
Micro haul. First of all, picked up William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. This was recommended by a fan of the show, and so I'm excited to dive into this one. It will be my first Faulkner, and so that will that'll probably be coming. Why can't I say probably? That'll probably be coming up in the next couple weeks.
Probably.
The next one's The Pale King by David Foster Wallace, the infamous novel that was left unfinished at the time of his passing. I'm excited to get into that as well. I've heard a lot of good things. In fact, a lot of fans of David Foster Wallace say that this is actually their favorite novel, so we'll see how that goes. That'll probably be next year. And finally, Mason and Dixon by Thomas Pynchon. I was getting so hyped from the video last week on Great American Novels, and I know there's a bunch of lists with this one here, and so this one will be awesome to tackle, especially because I was looking at a bunch of colonial American history around the time of 4th of July, and the fact that this is technically a historical fiction of that time, I think it'll be a fantastic read, but again, that'll probably be next year. Book haul over! But reading-wise this week, I went in a completely different direction. There had been no foreshadowing for this book here, but I decided to finally pick up White Noise by Don DeLillo. Oh, boom.
There's butter all over the microwave now.
Tight. This week was book buying week, but this year has been the year of the firsts. Again, this was a first novel by an author that is pretty well known, but someone that I haven't necessarily read, and this was just an incredible introduction. Published in 1985, White Noise actually won the National Book Award, and I really didn't have any preconceived notions for what was actually in here. I hadn't read any synopsis on the plot, and this edition specifically, which I will take a quick second to point out here, this edition is fantastic. The Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition for the 25th anniversary, by far the best cover, and once you've read the novel, just perfectly picks up so many of the plot points and themes of the book and are subtly represented not only on the front cover, the back cover, and the sides, but getting back to the synopsis, there isn't one here. There's just a bunch of these random sentences that at some points represent marketing campaigns or descriptions of life after death guaranteed with bonus coupons, weird things like that.
It's the rainbow hologram that gives this credit card a marketing intrigue.
But that's what made me pick it up. Jamie had actually had this book for quite a while, and I found it on our bookshelves, and I hadn't wanted to pick up Don DeLillo because for some reason I found his cover art in a lot of different editions to be really weird, and it made Don DeLillo seem like he was a writer of some gothic thrillers or something like that, or I don't even know, because you look at Underworld and it's kind of got that theme to it, and White Noise didn't really have great depictions either, but I saw this cover, was intrigued, and ended up just binging it this weekend. Now, I knew Don DeLillo was in the postmodern category, and so I kind of had that in mind when I was getting into it, and I thought that the story would be some kind of dystopian society, but I opened up the thing, and it ended up being the total opposite at the beginning. Utopian society.
Total opposite.
Maybe not utopian. But it starts out with the narrator Jack Gladney watching a bunch of cars come in and dropping students off because he's a professor at this college who has pioneered the study of Hitler. He was the first of his kind and had gained a lot of national recognition for this new program that was really in depth on Hitler studies. But the ironic thing is he didn't speak a lick of German. But he goes off and talks to his wife and tells her he saw another one of these caravan parades, and you start to learn that his family is a little mixed and matched. His wife Bobette is actually his fourth wife in 5 marriages. He married his first wife again the 4th time and then got with Bobette. They also have a lot of children from previous marriages that live in the house with them, and some that are also abroad with the other parents and their significant others. But, you go through this beginning of the story and you just learn a lot about the family life of the Gladneys and how they kind of fit together. The 4 children that live with them are all fairly young. They're all, I believe, under 13. I think the oldest one it was getting close to that, but they all have very unique personalities that I really liked, even though some of them were more doom and gloom than others. They all were just really unique characters and had a lot to bring to the table. But each of these chapters just explained the family life, the life of a college professor, and just the insecurities that go along with everyday life. Now, I've talked a lot about structure in previous videos because it really does impact me a lot when I'm reading a novel. I really appreciate when an author takes the time to make the structure of the novel as important as the plot is or the characters are, and I really found that to be the case with White Noise. I didn't realize there was going to be a shift later on, so it made the shift that happened on the second part of 3 that much greater, but as I was reading the first section here, I just kept noticing that the chapters were flowing along at quite a leisurely pace. They were over in, 8 pages or less, and it was very consistent. Each chapter was over at the exact right time, and it just felt very pleasant overall, even though there were grumblings from characters that made it seem like there was going to be more that was going to happen later on. Among those things were conversations of the fear of death with Jack and Bobette. Between each other, they were afraid of who was going to die first, and they actually would rather be the first one to die, they said, so they wouldn't have to be alone. And so you hear a little bit about that, and then there's another character who I just loved every time he came in, named Murray. He was another professor at the college, and he kind of had this strange sage-like wisdom to him. He liked to analyze the world around him. No matter what it was, he watched TV incessantly. He was part of this American culture studies at the college, and every time he talked about something, it kind of had this analysis of society that you were just thinking, yeah, this guy kind of rambles on, but he has a point, and frequently Jack feels the same way whenever he talks to Murray. But there's a conversation about natural disasters that goes on with Murray when Jack brings it up, that the family kind of got engrossed during their weekly Friday night TV watchings where they had seen a natural disaster, and maybe Bobette had wanted to turn the channel, but they were all so engrossed with what was going on that they just kept watching it and were kind of wishing there would be more because it was the excitement and something that wasn't happening to them, but something that they were still interested in nonetheless. And Murray talks about that extensively, being like, yeah, that is a part of human nature. And so you get some of the themes of the novel and some foreshadowing with all of the conversations that happened with Murray. And I just felt like every time he was in the book, he just had a lot of great things to say. Then hits part 2, the airborne toxic event. I hadn't expected this to be such a huge part of the novel. When I got to it, I didn't know it was going to be this huge shift, but I'm not going to give too much away here just because I think the rest of the novel is worth getting to, and I highly, highly recommend reading White Noise. But you get to part 2, and you think it's going to be like the rest of the book where, sure, something's going to happen, but it's still going to go on this leisurely stroll from chapter to chapter. But no, part 2 begins this chapter that goes on for over 50 pages and has this event that really changes a lot of what's going on inside the story and changes a lot of characters because of their interactions with what goes on during the airborne toxic event. Up until this point, you've kind of heard TVs and radios on in the background. Don DeLillo makes a point to insert a lot of these catchphrases or any of these taglines into the novel because the radio or the TV would be on in the house just constantly, really. And it would always be he heard in the distance, blah, 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 blah. And you start to realize that, yeah, that relates to white noise, but in part two, all of that gets kicked up a whole other notch. The family starts to get all of their information from the radio, they get it from hearing what other people have heard in their various mediums that they get their information from, and it starts to become this information overload and just an overload in general as they're trying to navigate this new disaster that's hit the town. And it makes that technology stand out more than it did at the beginning, and makes any more of those highlights that happen later on in the book stand out even more because of the concentration of all of those interruptions, though they may be necessary, all the interruptions that were happening in part two during the airborne toxic event.
Only your code allows you to enter the system.
And not only that, there's a lot of more hints at the theme of the novel where this airborne toxic event, the actual chemical that's going on in the air, I'll let you read it to see what exactly happens, but the chemical is called niodine D, or niodine derivative. And the professionals that are actually taking care of the event and talking to all of the townspeople that are going through this evacuation that they have to go through, they're called SimUvac, for simulated evacuation. And those two, if you think about it, represent ideas of something that's not the original, not the real thing. Niodine derivative, it's a derivative of the actual chemical that's causing this problem. And SimUvac, they're not actually evacuation experts, they're experts at simulating evacuations. In fact, the SimUvac experts specifically said they were using this event as practice for future simulations. And it gets crazier after that when SimUvac stays in town and they start to simulate evacuations. And then when really minor things happen that are still enough that their services would be needed, nobody actually reacts, even though they had all participated in these simulations. It's just not a big deal. They were all about these artificial events or things that were copies of the original. And it starts to reinforce the idea of modern times and our reliance on these barriers or these fake events to not really fully experience what's going on around us, especially in this novel where it's using the TV and radio interspersed taglines and advertising. It just shows that we are fully integrated into this new era of this technological dependence and this aversion to the real world.
20 common mistakes about the end of the world.
There are darker examples, but one that was just hilarious is with one of the kids, Heinrich. He's talking to Jack and he says, on the radio, they said it's going to rain tonight. Jack tells him, it's raining now, isn't it? And they start arguing back and forth, and Heinrich is just so into this idea that they say it's going to rain later, and Jack is telling him, well, if somebody held a gun to your head and asked you, is it raining now, what would you say? And there's so many qualifiers, but Heinrich has so much more faith in the radio broadcast than he does in looking at what's going on around him. And there are absolutely many more themes in this novel, and it was just crazy how much was packed in here, and I just found myself continuing to read through and seeing how much deeper it was getting, and seeing how much my appreciation for this novel grew as I kept reading along. And so I don't want to spoil what goes on there in the back two-thirds too much. I kind of led to that point, and it goes on from there. But I'll just say I kept expecting it to be this dystopian novel, but it really wasn't, and that almost made it more frightening. All of the things that happened in the book could feasibly happen in real life, and all of the reactions of the people to these events could be real thoughts of real people, and there was just something about it where there was a lot of truth spoken, but it was a lot of stuff that simultaneously filled me with dread and some form of transcendence a little bit. This is partly because they talk about some abstract concepts at the end of the novel, and so, it's not stuff that's very pinned down, and it can kind of make you feel this dichotomy of emotions. But I just know that there were certain parts later on in the novel where I was just left breathless. And the thing was, that was even before the climax of the novel. There's a huge event that happens at the end, and a very symbolic character that comes out there literally in the last 30 pages or so. and I just couldn't believe that it ended the way that it did. Even the falling action after the climax really gave you a lot to think about, and for me personally, it left me just sitting there kind of dumbfounded at what I had just read. I was just so impressed with White Noise overall. And again, like I say with all these authors that I haven't read, I can't believe that I haven't read Don DeLillo until now. And he's definitely been moved up on priority authors for me. I know he has a lot of other novels that are considered masterpieces, and a lot of novels that are those masterpieces that relate a lot to the other great novels that I really enjoy. And so I'm very much looking forward to exploring Don DeLillo more, and I just can't recommend White Noise enough, as I've already said in this video previously. Are you a Don DeLillo fan? If you are and you have a specific list of top Don DeLillo books, leave them in the comments below. If you're not and you have any questions about White Noise, I'd be happy to talk about it down there as well. But if you haven't read it, definitely pick it up. And like I said, this edition's a great one, the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. And on that note, there will be a video pretty soon discussing cover art specifically, and that idea of don't judge a book by its cover, because obviously it played some role in White Noise for me. But that'll be a video coming in the next couple of weeks, and so start thinking about some of your favorite cover art for your books and what editions are better for you. But this is a great edition for White Noise, and I hope you pick it up here in the near future. I guess I'm done. Book haul over! See you next week.